Hello, Joe. Thank you for coming on and having a little talk primarily around masculinity and things that affect kind of men's personal development. We've known each other for a long time now, and I'd really like just to kind of expose what you do specifically around how kind of masculinity has affected your work, and kind of bring more people to know about what you're doing. And also, I think the people that know you probably don't know um, a lot about some of the themes that are actually in the deeper themes in your work.
Mm.
I sort of wanted to invite you on to talk a little bit about that. So maybe the best way for us to start would be if you kind of introduced yourself a little bit to some of the people here who maybe don't know you.
Yeah, great. It's always a pleasure to talk, Laurence. Yeah, my name's Joe Machine. I'm a professional artist and writer. I've been involved in art now ever since I can really remember, ever since I was young enough to draw. But it really kicked off for me in about 1999 when I became part of the Stuckist art movement. So it was around about that period, 98, 99, when I started doing art more sort of professionally, really. But I was involved before that. I was involved in crime and had a very rocky sort of upbringing, a lot of problems in my youth, which I felt really both informed me and held me back in some ways. And I think they're things that, strangely enough, I've learned to work with and deal with and use them in a positive way, or as positive a way as possible. And really, art has been my vehicle for self-expression in that sort of way of using whatever problems that I had in the past and turning them into a viable form of expression for me, and obviously something that I can do to earn myself some money, and something that I can do that's it's actually going to help me in my life. So I've been an artist now, really, as I said, more professionally since around about 1999. I've had exhibits all over the world, exhibits in Trieste and Czech Republic and in America and lots of other venues and places. And, it's been a strange old ride, really, in a way, because I think, as a boy from sort of the back streets of Kent and London, I don't think I ever really expected or really had any real idea that I would get on in life, that I ever would make anything of myself. But I think I have managed to do that, and I'm very pleased that I've managed to do that. I've had some very good sort of friends and support from other people along the way, which have been very, very, very happy to have. I think that's been a great, very, very good thing for me as far as my own what I'm doing is concerned, my own work, my own art, and that's pretty much what I do.
We've actually sort of worked together for quite a long time now. I think over 10 years. I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think if my memory serves me correctly, we met in Clerkenwell. I think it was a Billy Childish exhibition he was having there, and we met sort of briefly then. And sort of meeting you was a strange thing because I felt like even initially, I think there's some people that you meet and you feel like it's kind of like you've known them all your life. It's sort of like someone they think, this is like one of your own sort of thing. So I think there was a very strong initial sort of contact, and we sort of went on from there, sort of working together, and we've worked together ever since, really, through thick and thin. So
Yeah. Well, I was thinking like the bit that you almost touched upon it then. The thing that I think was interesting is, initially we kind of started working together because obviously you produce art and I sell art. But I think there was something there which maybe we didn't even realize at the time, but there were similar journeys there, I think. And when I look at your work and when I hear your story, and we'll be talking more about your novel later on, there seems to have been, like, I've been on very much a sort of search through men's personal development and all that stuff to kind of work out what it means for me to be a man and to kind of reconcile those sort of dark parts of me, as it were, and those dark desires and the lightness in me. And also I was kind of, my journey has been very much down a sort of mytho-poetic route of men's personal development through the stuff I do with the Mankind Project and stuff like that. Um, And your work very much shows a very similar journey through trying to understand sexuality, to trying to understand the violence and darker elements, and through to kind of mythology and magic. Um, and and so I'm kind of interested in that. I'm interested in how you kind of reconcile those elements in your work of masculinity, violence, sex, and mythology and magic.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, isn't it? I think the thing is, as far as I was concerned, and again, very much like you, I was brought up, I'm a lad from the streets, really, and I was brought up in the streets. And my real upbringing was around pubs and clubs when I was a kid. And I grew up with a lot of stories, and a lot of my family. I come from a family which is a mixture of my mum's Jewish and my dad comes from. He's got gypsy blood, and he had an amusement arcade on the southeast coast. And I grew up around pubs and clubs, nightclubs, and there's a lot of drinking, a lot of violence, and a lot of crime. And I grew up, as I said, from a very young age, sitting in pubs, listening to the stories of most of them were a lot of drunks. Really, and drunks are very, very great storytellers, as you probably will know yourself from your similar experiences. But yeah, so I kind of grew up with stories in a way, but you kind of become embroiled in other people's along the way as well, and that sort of upbringing amongst the violence. And I mean, my childhood was extremely visceral. My childhood was a frightening place, and I'm bloody glad you can't time travel, because I'd never ever want to go back. It was just so problematic, so painful and miserable, and certainly frightening. I mean, it certainly had its good points as well. I mean, I was lucky because I lived around about a mile away from my dad's business, so we could actually get away from the violence and the aggravation, or all the pubs and all that sort of thing. So I had a very good imagination. And I think that's the one thing that's kept me going all through the years, really, is having this imagination. And, you think about the stories of other people, the stuff you've been involved in yourself. You can either do one of two things with that. And I think I let it frighten me. I did the first thing, and I let that frighten me for years. And through want of sort of better tutelage, because my father was quite a remote man when I was young, so I couldn't get much in the way of support from him, apart from the fact that he always told me to look after myself and not let anyone take any liberties. But I don't know how well, when you're like a skinny kid who spends most of your life dodging fights and trying to keep the hell away from adult violence, a kid who's grown up with seeing the most visceral acts of sort of bloody violence, really, and being terrified. I think my reaction to that really was to go into crime. I mean, I was too late for the whole sort of punk thing. I came along a bit after that. So I was around about, I was around about 5, 6 years old about 6 years old, 1979. So the country was in a bit of economic decline at the time. Jimmy Callaghan, Labour government. There's a whole climate of fear. Fear was around the 70s, as you'll probably remember yourself. It was a very weird time, strange time, a lot of strange stuff on TV. But there was this whole climate of fear. And I think that can, of course, when you're a kid, that can hold you back. My way of making something of myself was to become involved in crime. And I think that a lot of the people around me, crime was a way of life. I was friends with my friends, their dads were all alcoholics, they were drug addicts, or they were in prison. So I grew up with, I used to go around their house, there would be heroin syringes scattered around, there'd be drugs, whatever they could afford, whatever stuff, a lot of stolen items scattered around everywhere. So I grew up with crime, and that was my way when I was very young of making something of myself. Apart from the artwork, which when I was a kid, when I was very young, when I started school, I started making drawings. So, that was, that was a very important thing for me. Art and drawing, very important thing. I think I was certainly berated for the drawings that I did, because where other kids are drawing like nice pictures of cars and gardens and stuff like that, there's little Joe sitting there at the table drawing pictures of people getting stabbed in the throat and stuff like that. So the teachers sort of they kept me away from everyone else. I think they were quite right to do, because I had no intention of stopping at the time. But again, I was segregated from everyone when I was a kid, and I was kept away from everyone else. But that was a good thing for me because I was put at the back of the class, and I taught myself to read, and I carried on drawing wherever I could. And that's something that stayed with me for the rest of my life. I mean, I it was my artwork actually that actually ended up getting me kicked out of primary school in the first place because I stabbed my teacher over a piece of artwork that I did, and she tried to show me up in front of the whole class. I was very upset and frightened about this at the particular time, and angry as well. And my reaction, there was a blackboard compass on the table, was to stab her in the hand with it, and I got kicked out of school because of that. But um, it was an energy that I had in me, and it had nowhere to go. It could only, I really felt that it could only come out either one of two ways, and that was really through crime, and either through violence or stealing at the time, or through drawing, through making art or painting, whatever I could get my hands on, and expressing myself in that way. That really has stayed with me all of my life, and strangely enough, it's been a very good thing because I've been able to realise that the fear that I grew up with, actually, and some of the bad things that happened, I've been able to turn those things into visual art, into images, and also into writing as well. Hundreds and hundreds of poems, loads of short stories, all that sort of stuff, and thousands of paintings over the years. Many of them, I would say, around about 80% of them around my life and about the stuff that happened to me. And the whole thing of growing up in the environment that I did, my life as far as crime was concerned, the acts of thievery, treachery, being chucked in clink when I was 16 years old, being put in Borstal. So all of that sort of thing, and gradually over the years, I really was able to turn a lot of this stuff, this material, into writing and painting, which I think that's pure gold if you can do that, if you're lucky enough to be able to work with it and not let it hold you back, not let it retard your progress, and turn it into some form of expression.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I find really interesting about your work as a kind of body of work, and also kind of I relate to quite a lot because obviously my influences are kind of people like Robert Bly and Joseph Campbell, and and what I see in your work is, if you look at your kind of earlier work, it's very kind of it's very brutal, like it's very dark, and the subject matter is very violent. There's lots of sex, lots of violence, very dark and brutal. And what I get from that, and what I get from where your work then kind of moves along to, through kind of nature paintings and into the more kind of mythological stuff that you do now, is that there was a willingness, willingness might even be the wrong word, but maybe it was a need. But you certainly kind of took the approach that people like Campbell and Bly talk about, more of going into it, rather than running from the stuff that kind of scares you, or the bits of yourself that you don't understand. Your work kind of goes right in and starts to kind of try and go into it and look in that darkest cave, and kind of and as you say, you kind of turn it into gold. But what's quite interesting is it starts off and it's quite kind of literal at the beginning, like, this is the brutality and stuff that I've seen, and it frightened me, and so it's almost like therapy. It was like you looked to me like you were painting it over and over and over and over again, as almost like sort of exposure therapy to try and kind of work that out. But then as it goes on and the years go, and I've seen your work go on, you get much more into the symbolic much later on, and that's almost like you've gone from sort of talking therapy to like depth psychology or something. You've gone right into sort of more sort of Jungian kind of territory to kind of work stuff out now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's that old saying, isn't there, from the Gnostic Gospels: if you bring forth that which is inside you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is inside you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And I think they're two very clear sort of paths there, and I knew which one I was going to take. I think, even from a pretty early age, I was set out on a very destructive path, but I also knew that I didn't want to die. I didn't want to end up in prison. And strangely enough, all that stuff that I did, all the hardships and being in solitary confinement and all that sort of stuff, everything that I put myself through as a youth, really, it was strangely looking back upon it now is really the construction of a myth, even like a self-made myth. And you look at it in terms of, well, you can look at it in terms of other myths around you. I mean, for example, I've been working on a series of images for Beowulf for the great mythographer John Matthews. And if you look at the myth of Beowulf, you realise that Beowulf himself is quite a braggart. You know, he's talking about a lot of the stuff he's done in the past. He elaborates on it, but the actual events of the myth itself, that the Beowulf story, the epic poem, there's really only sort of three main events to it, and the last one ends with the death of Beowulf. It's sort of, there's an inevitability about it, and there's an inevitability about the myth for all of us. We're all going to end up the same way. We're all going to die. It's just what we do along the way. And I think that I always wanted to work with that material. I wasn't happy. I got to a certain point where I wasn't happy just staying where I was. I wanted to work with it. I wanted to understand it. And I think painting really did, more than anything else, painting really did help me to understand that. And as you said, really depicting the same thing, the same sort of stuff over and over and over again. The sort of brutal animalistic aspects of sex, the whole aspects of violence, the thievery, everything that I did is forcing yourself to look at it and forcing yourself to understand that there is a spiritual element to it. It's not just animalistic behavior. This is like, in the absence of a ritual in my life, of a coming of age ritual, I had to provide myself with many hurdles to get over, many problems. And I think that's definitely what happened. It's maybe totally unconscious at the time, which I'm sure it was. It was completely and utterly unconscious. But I put myself through all of this stuff. And for me, there didn't seem to be any way out of it. But of course, the way out of it was always inside me. It was always there. It was looking me smack in the face, really. And it's over, as I said, a period of time. There's been no sort of sudden epiphany. There's been no sort of moment of clarity for me. There's just been a gradual understanding and coming to terms with my past, and knowing that some of the things that I went through were necessary for me to reach the point that I am in now, which is I'm in a far better place. I mean, I've got 5 children. I'm married. I never thought that would be possible for me. I never thought I'd be able to hold down any sort of serious job or anything that I would be able to do. I didn't think I'd be able to have money, pay rent. I didn't think I'd be able to do any of that stuff, really. I didn't think I'd be able to, function properly. But I always wanted to. I mean, that's the whole thing. And if you're providing that you are going to work with these base elements, the stuff that's happened in your past, then you've got something. Probably the only victory is possible to have.
Yeah, and I sort of want to pick you up on that a little bit, because obviously you and I are working on a version of Iron John, and the Iron John story is kind of central to Robert Blyer's book, which is a search for masculinity. What does masculinity mean now? And one of the sort of elements he talks about in that is, the kind of hero's journey that the character goes through, the boy goes through in Iron John to become the man. And part of that picked up was a bit of, because there was no sort of initiatory process for you to become from a boy to a man. You sort of had to try and make them up, and you had to try and find them. And I think that's kind of common for a lot of men. Young men is go, well, what am I? What is this thing I am now? I'm not a boy anymore, but I don't really understand what this is. And he has a line in there where he says, if we don't initiate the boys will initiate themselves. And that kind of thing of like putting ourselves in danger, putting ourselves in ridiculous situations just to try and to see what we're possible of doing and where we can go, and to try and find ourselves is kind of key to that story. And so in terms of like your journey from boy to man, and to sort of, as you're saying, you're in a much better place now, that kind of a much more sort of healthy masculine place in a way. How much of of that journey do you think is about accepting those parts of yourselves that you might rather not look at?
I think that's probably the most important part of it. You know, and that can take a long time, but I think it is definitely the most important part of it, because if there's stuff that you can't accept about yourself, you're never going to fully mature properly. You're never going to be able to, if you can't understand your own personal ugliness or how you got into certain situations, you'll never really stand a true chance of getting out of it or avoiding it. You have to understand it. You know, that sort of stuff can take years. And I think you're quite right. But I think an important point is that you have so you've got the story of Iron John, but you have the wild man dwelling beneath the surface of the water. So you have the whole image of the wild man, and I mean that myth is on many heraldic shields all the way through Germany and Central Europe. It's such an important figure, that figure of the wild man. It's an archetype that is deep within the unconscious. But I think what actually comes out, that sort of wildness, if you completely give yourself over to it, that's going to destroy you. So you need to understand enough of it in order to not totally immerse yourself in it. You have to understand it. You have to go into it without giving into it entirely. You have to be able to balance it with something. And you could say, I suppose, there comes another sort of archetype, like the idealist or something like that. So you may have the hero or the idealist sort of archetype, that sort of thing. But it's very much a good idea not to become too involved with the idealist either, because if you're too involved with that, you're living in the spirit realm in that sort of way. You're not living, you can't cope. You know, you can't do anything. You can't sort yourself out properly because you're not grounded. That other stuff keeps you grounded. All the darkness, all the other stuff. Well, not just the darkness, but the day-to-day nuts and bolts of life. That's what's going to keep you grounded. All of that stuff. But you have to balance yourself between the sort of wild man and the civilized man, and that's a strange no man's land that exists between those two, but it is possible. And I think I wouldn't say I'm there. I wouldn't say I've made it entirely or anything like that, but it's a journey that we're all on. Well, I think we're all discovering this and we're moving towards it. And once you reach another stage, you move on towards it. But it's not possible to do without first admitting to the mistakes you've made, the darkness within yourself, and the whole male archetype in general, and not thinking to yourself, right, okay, well, that's what I was. That's all I can ever be. You have to be able to move forward.
Yeah, Bly often talks about you need kind of one hand in the sky and one hand in the blood.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what he was talking about. That kind of, you've got to, and there's no kind of, you know, it's not an accident that most kind of crowns, when you see them illustrated, are kind of pointing up and pointing down.
Yeah.
You know, that somewhere that's that balance is, I'm here, I'm alive. There's stuff that just has to be done to be lived. It's sometimes brutal, it's sometimes cruel, it's sometimes beautiful. And there's all of these things that I'm trying to aspire to, and the greater good and consciousness and all of those things. And somehow we need to find the balance in those.
Yeah.
I know you've been, I know the novel's now finished, and we're looking to get that out either later this year or early next year. What other stuff are you working on at the moment?
Well, I'm working on, as you know, I'm working on a whole series of the Iron John paintings at the moment. So, we're going through them and working on the material for the illustrations for the Iron John book, which is very important. So I'm working on some scraper board illustrations for those at the moment, and also some paintings for the book as well, which is an absolute pleasure to do. I mean, it's such a deep myth, such a deep story. I'm working on those. I'm working on the whole series of Saints of Britain paintings, and always working on stuff to do with mythological figures. As I've been working with John Matthews on the Beowulf myth, all of those stories. But all of this stuff. But presently at the moment it's the Iron John stuff, and a whole bunch of nature paintings as well, which are an absolute pleasure to do.
Okay. So let's finish up there. And I like to finish up with 3 questions. All right. So the first one is, what keeps you well? What do you do to keep yourself well?
I think what keeps me well now more than anything else really is probably 2 things. My family, first and foremost, that's spending. I've got 3 sons, and two of whom are living at home with me now. I have a son he's off and he's working. I have a son who's fastly approaching 16, and another son who's he's 11 years old this year. So, you know, I've got some interesting age groups to deal with, but being a father, being around the boys, doing stuff with them, you know, sort of taking them up the woods, that sort of stuff, doing a bit of cooking up the woods, you know, all of that kind of stuff. You know, just keeping busy with the family, really, in that sort of sense. So doing stuff with them, I think that really promotes a serious feeling of well-being, which is not to be underestimated at all. So I think it's a family more than anything else, really, that keeps me going now, keeps me mentally healthy. You know, sort of you have to think about what you've done in the past and squaring that with where you are now. I have experience, that's where I am now. I have experience that I can make use of to give advice to my own sons so they don't get involved in similar sort of problems. They can steer clear of some of the stuff that I did and not fall into the same traps and pitfalls that I did when I was a young man. Hopefully, I mean, you can never tell whatever they're going to do, but you to try and do the best for them. So there is that. And of course, there is the painting on a daily basis, painting, writing, whatever comes up. But I'm doing something every day. So, you know, keeping busy with my work certainly keeps the mental health where in exactly the right place where it should be.
Okay. And the second question is, if you could meet yourself as a teenager, what would you give yourself? What advice would you have given yourself?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think I would have told myself that it was going to be all right, and you know, not to worry, and you know that there is a future, and there's a future that you can participate in, not one that revolves around me, you know, going to prison. It does not have to be that way. It does not have to go down that route, and it very, very nearly did for me. So I think that would, you know, I would say that, you know, look, you are, and you will be loved, and it's all right. You know, do not worry. Things are going to work out all right. It's going to be fine for you. Carry on with what you're doing and go more into sort of the whole art thing, which is, you know, what I ended up doing anyway. So, you know, I think that's probably as close as I can come to any advice that I would give my younger self.
Okay, thank you. And the final question is, what book do you think has had the most influence on your life?
Well, just one book, you mean, in now or in the past, or
However you want to take it. Was
right.
there one that maybe you read and it changed something, or one that you're with now, or what?
Well, yeah, it's again, it's kind of difficult because I mean, when I was a kid, I read Clockwork Orange on many occasions because I think the violence, the sex and the violence in that was very. It's very close to the sort of stuff that I was involved with, and very close to the sort of gang mentality and all that sort of thing that I was involved with at the time. So that did appeal to me, and the language, the slang, everything like that. But however, I've moved past that. So I think if I had to speak about a book that had the most human content in there, that probably would be what most people call the Old Testament, the Torah. I've got my mum's copy of the Torah. I've been very lucky to have had that, and I read it and reread it over and over again. And it's got the most human stories in, and it's probably one of the most misunderstood books, unless you know really to look for the metaphor within the story. You can get tied up in all sorts of rubbish about punitive systems and God being this overbearing patriarchal figure. I think the whole aspect of God in my life is an incredibly important thing, you know, the whole aspect of what that means for me. And I'm not a religious person at all, you know, not at all. So I have a very personal relationship with God in that sort of sense. So I think Torah in that sort of sense for me, because you've got all the stuff that contains, again, a lot of stuff in my life, the violence, the adulteries, the drunkenness, it's all there. Everything's all there. You know, every aspect of human nature is all there in those old stories, and humanity is developing. So, you know, it's something that you can read there. You can look at the myths of those old stories and think, I can completely identify with those people. They might be from a totally different era, but I identify with them. I identify with the mistakes they made and how people like Abraham, developed into becoming becoming, I suppose, what Jung refers to as whole, and being whole rather than good, which is, I think, something that people should really strive to be.
Yes. Great. All right. Thank you, Joe. Just for anyone who's listening to this, we're going to be organising a series of events with Joe over the coming months, including some poetry readings and some information around the novel. We've got a novel coming out towards the end of the year, and as you heard mentioned there, there's some the illustrated version of Iron John, which is being worked on now. So be sure to make sure you get some information about that. So it just leaves me to say thank you for your time, Joe. A pleasure as always to talk to you, and I hope to see you again soon.
Stay free.